Antonio Guterres confirmed the United Nations commitment to help Yemenis and end the war. U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking, says that coordinations with Russians over Yemen is constant. Houthi rebels continue shelling civilian homes in Hodeidah in violation of Stockholm Agreement. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The Secretary General of the United Nations said he is committed to help Yemen and Yemenis to stop the war and their suffering and move forward with peace efforts. In a meeting with the Yemeni Foreign Minister in New York, the two sides discussed the latest developments in Yemen, especially the ongoing Houthi offensive on Ma'rib and Shabwa, the current situation of the United Nations mission in Hodeidah, plus the Houthis' obstruction resolve safer tanker issue. The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, praised the level of cooperation between the Yemeni government and the United Nations organizations, and stressed that the humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains among the priorities of the United Nations. Earlier, Griffiths called on the international community to continue providing aid to Yemen. He indicated that the most vulnerable people are the ones who bear the cost of the Yemeni crisis, including women and children. The U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking, announced that he is in constant contact with Russians over the Yemeni crisis, indicating that he considers this communication useful. According to the Russian news agency Sputnik, Lenderking said, "I'm in constant contact with Russia on Yemen, and I find this communication very useful." Houthis have invaded Sana'a in 2014. They turned the country into a collective jail. Their violations have crossed all limits and human norms. The following report attempts to look at the roots of an agenda of this terrorist movement.
Who are the Houthis and what do they want? A question which might be running in many people's mind. The Houthis are an armed political religious group whose political and military organization is called the Ansar Allah movement. Their name is associated with the founder of the movement, Hussein al-Houthi, who was killed by Yemeni forces in 2004. The movement was founded in 1992 and took the Saada region in northern Yemen as its center. The movement fought armed confrontations for years against the regime of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, which claimed thousands of lives. The Houthis took control of the Yemeni capital Sana'a in September 2014 and continued on towards Aden, Yemen's largest city. The situation further deteriorated when the Houthis killed ex-President Ali Abdullah Saleh on December 4, 2017. Since late 2014, Human Rights Watch has documented dozens of cases of the Houthis carrying out arbitrary and abusive detention, as well as enforced disappearances. Human rights violations going on in Yemen, like the cruel, inhuman or degrading punishment, conditions in prisons and detention centers, including overcrowding, lack of access to health care, poor sanitation and hygiene, combined with the spread of COVID-19, exposed detainees to substantial health risks. The Houthis have received many criticisms, most notably the exploitation and recruitment of children. The Houthis see no problem in recruiting teenagers, with the blessing of the tribes supporting them. Many people wonder about the goal that the movement seeks, especially in view of the increasing number of war casualties in Yemen as a result of the ongoing conflict between the Houthis and the Yemeni government. The UN has identified conflict as the root cause of the Yemen's crisis. Tens of thousands of people have been killed since the war erupted in 2014, when Houthi rebels launched a campaign to capture the capital Sana'a. In March 2015, a Saudi-led coalition launched a deadly campaign against the rebels, one that has been widely criticized by human rights groups for its high civilian death toll. The use of force by these groups has exacerbated the humanitarian crisis situation in Yemen, describing Yemen as one of the worst crises in the world by the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen. In the end, the question that is in the mind of millions of Yemenis: When would Houthis stop all this devastation?
In Hodeidah, the Joint Forces defenses shot down a Houthi drone in Durayhimi, south of the city. A military source stated that the Houthi drone carried bombs and was flying over Durayhimi. The drone was brought down immediately. Still in Hodeidah, Houthi militia targeted civilian areas in Hodeidah. Local sources reported that the militia targeted villages in Durayhimi district with B-10 artillery shells. Also, the militia fired on citizen homes in Al-Jah using machine guns. In Ma'rib, the executive unit for the management of IDPs camps reported that Houthi militia has been imposing a suffocating siege for days on Al-Abdiyah. 5,106 displaced families, along with a population of 32,496 people, are living in great danger and lack basic services, as it has become difficult to reach them with aid. The executive unit confirmed that the situation in the district has become a human disaster, knowing that a number of displaced families fleeing the war towards Harib district were stranded and prevented from leaving to safe places. Houthis, since seized power, have been committing all types of human rights violations. The most is that of recruiting children and sending them to war fronts. This report has more on that story.
Houthi propaganda in mosques and summer centers has misled many families, thinking they will enhance the educational level of their children and spare them the void during the summer vacation. But the extremist religious mobilization that these children receive and the incitement that the fight is against the United States and the West made the teenagers affected by that propaganda, and many of them joined the battlefront. The recent Houthi offensive on Ma'rib led to the death of nearly 2,000 children recruited by the Houthis into their ranks. The Deputy Permanent Representative of Yemen to the United Nations, Marwan Nu'man, revealed that the Houthi militia has recruited more than 35,000 children since 2014, 17% of whom are under the age of 11, while more than 6,700 children are actively fighting with the rebels. In the same context, Mutahhar al-Badadi, Executive Director of the Yemeni Coalition for Monitoring Human Rights Violations, said that among the recruits were 308 children aged between 8 and 11 years, more than 4,000 children aged between 12 and 14 years, and more than 7,000 children aged between 15 and 17 years. Further, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, reported that 8.1 million Yemeni children are in need of emergency educational assistance due to the conflict in the country. This is a huge increase compared to 1.1 million children before the war. The organization also stressed the war must stop so that children can live their childhood. In early July, UNICEF officials said in a report that more than 2 million children of school age are currently out of school in Yemen, while more than 3,600 children have been recruited since the start of the war. Houthi militia uses schools, mosques and summer camps to brainwash at least 60,000 children, train them and send them to battlefields. Distortion of the curricula printed by the militia threatens to create a generation of extremists. Houthi snipers claim the lives of children daily in a horrific way in Taiz, which has been suffering from a suffocating siege by the Houthis for 7 years. These figures reveal only a small picture of the crimes committed by the Houthi militia against children in Yemen. However, the real one could be more intimidating.
Coming next. Amid war, vulnerable Yemeni women have limited access to medical care.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالأهلها في المزرعة، والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم، دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى ما ترفت بقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبالة اللي هي البنت سابها من دور رجليها، صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها هي بطلت رجليها كامل.
قلت أزود هلي وقابل لي لعب وطبعته تحت الزواية
Welcome back. Committee of the Red Cross indicated that it has provided emergency food aid during the past days to more than 600 families, mostly in the areas of Rada, El Sawadiyya, and El Arsh in El Bayda. The organization added that these families were once again affected by the recent floods in the region, which deteriorated their living conditions and deprived them of basic daily necessities. Yemeni women are the most among those severely hit by the devastating war. They suffer greatly due to food shortage. This has affected their health. The following report sheds light on the suffering of Yemeni women amid the collapsing health system.
Women and girls have been disproportionately affected by the war in Yemen, including by some of the worst effects of the food crisis. 1.1 million pregnant or lactating women suffered from acute malnourishment in 2018. Evidence from humanitarian crises globally shows that when food is scarce, women often sacrifice their own meals to allow their family members to eat, further increasing the risk they face. Women and children also account for roughly 75% of those displaced in Yemen. Amongst this group, female-headed households are at some of the greatest risk of food insecurity. They have lower monthly incomes, and because they have no male presence in the family, are increasingly forced to take on non-traditional roles outside the home that expose them to the risk of violence risks that have been intensified by the war. In November 2017, the UN reported that incidents of gender-based violence increased by over 63% since before the conflict. Freedom from violence is essential for women and girls to live full and healthy lives. Gender-based violence stops women and girls' immediate needs from being met and prevents them from reaching their potential. This reality is clearly illustrated in Yemen, where even women with a male in the family are increasingly cut off from the essential services. Staff from Al-Hakim, a Yemeni women's organization, told us, movement restrictions were part of women's reality, but it is now exacerbated as men want to protect women from the risks of gender-based violence at checkpoints in order to preserve their honor. The desperation created by the crisis is also contributing to rising numbers of child marriages. More than 2/3 of girls are married before the age of 18, compared to 50% before the crisis began. Child marriage is often a coping mechanism for families because they believe a husband's family can offer better protection or because it can raise dowry payments to cope with conflict-related hardship. Yet, the risks of child, early or forced marriage are well established. These women and girls have children earlier and more frequently and face higher risks of pregnancy-related injuries and death in childbirth. Despite the serious and potentially life-threatening consequences of gender-based violence and poor health services access for women, these sectors suffered major funding shortfalls. As funding levels declined in September 2019, United Nations Population Fund warned over 1 million Yemeni women need funds now, or they will lose access to life-saving reproductive health services, putting their lives and those of their babies at risk.
In Sana'a, economic sources revealed that Houthi militia arrested more than 137 traders and store owners after refusing to pay unofficial taxes. According to sources, the militia reported that those detainees wouldn't be released unless they pay extra fines. Houthi violations against Yemeni children have transcended all space and time. Innocent children have been deprived basic rights. This report has more on this story.
A recent UNICEF report shows that between 2015 and 2021, at least 3,153 children have died in Yemen and 5,660 children have been injured. On average, 50 children are killed and 90 are wounded or permanently disabled each month. This vast majority are harmed by explosive weapons with wide areas effects. Attacks on schools harm children in several ways. Yemen's 3.4 million children out of school are at increased risk of recruitment and kidnapping by armed groups, and girls are 3 times more likely to be victims of forced marriage. Houthi rebels have had a devastating impact on Yemen's children, with at least 27 child casualties caused by landmines since 2015. Alongside this devastating physical toll, landmines represent a continuing threat to Yemen's children by denying access to clean water facilities and grazing lands. 3 separate NGOs have stated they were unable to provide support to areas on Yemen's western coast due to landmines on key roads, making delivering essential aid impossible. In August 2015, 3 separate incidents of Houthi shelling killed 5 children, 3 of whom were killed when a rocket landed near to where they were playing football. Over a 10-day period in May 2017, indiscriminate shelling caused 190 civilian casualties, killing at least 4 children and injuring 10 more. On June 8, 2016, 3 children were killed when a rocket hit their school. Indiscriminate shelling of residential areas has been catastrophic to the welfare of children in Yemen. Yemen's children have endured immense suffering due to explosive violence over the past 5 years of conflict. Unfortunately, the suffering is unlikely to abate in the near future. Deliberate and systematic destruction of Yemen's infrastructure has precipitated a humanitarian catastrophe. 93% of children need humanitarian assistance. 2 million children are out of school and 1 in 5 have lost their homes. The devastation of Yemen through the use of airstrikes, landmines, and shelling has caused the death and injury of thousands of children, and the near complete destruction of Yemen's critical infrastructure has caused a humanitarian disaster that will likely cause the deaths of thousands more before the conflict's end. Children should only worry about what they will eat and where they're going to play. Sadly, this is not the situation for Yemeni children.
The Electricity Corporation in Aden announced gradual shutdown of the generating stations due to lack of fuel, despite the arrival of the 4th batch of the Saudi grant. According to Reuters, people of Aden said that hours of power cuts rose on Friday to reach 10 hours in some cities. People also expressed their anger over the continued deterioration of living conditions and services, especially in terms of the electricity sector, with temperatures rising in the summer to more than 40 degrees. In Aden, the Yemeni rial reached a new record in decline to break the barrier of 1,200 rials, while the Saudi rial exchange rate exceeded 300 rials. This collapse has been reflected in an increase in commissions for cash transfers from the liberated governorates to Houthi militia-controlled areas by 90%. Thais witnessed rallies denouncing the horrific collapse of the local currency. Protesters demanded dismissal of the government and replacing it with a competent mini-cabinet to liberate the country and put an end to the economic decline. Demonstrators affirmed they would continue their rallies and escalate to end the government inefficiency. The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 30 new cases of the COVID-19 pandemic in 6 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 9 cases were recorded in Aden, 8 in Hadramaut, 5 in Taiz, 3 in El Dala, 3 in Ma'rib, and 2 in Shabwa. Also 9 deaths were recorded, plus 30 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 1,891, including 1,682 deaths and 5,500 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Antonio Guterres confirms the United Nations commitment to help Yemenis and end the war. U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen Tim Lenderking says that coordinations with Russians over Yemen is constant. Houthi rebels continue shelling civilian homes in Hodeidah and violations of Stockholm Agreement. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fuad. See you soon.